As the creator of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Hirohiko Araki has gradually revealed his inspirations through interviews. One example is the mountain training of Ken Asuka from Karate Baka Ichidai is the main inspiration for Jonathan's Hamon training. While Araki has no problem showing his illustrations often come from pre-existing art and photography, he has oddly neglected to openly declare Fist of the North Star or Hokuto no Ken as one of the driving forces behind the creation of JoJo. Araki had once stated Fist of the North Star being in his top 10 anime and manga list, but to my knowledge he has never said that it influenced him in any way. The most he's done in relation to Hokuto no Ken is a tribute piece to Kenshiro, and making a direct reference during the Bohemian Rhapsody fight in Stone Ocean. Apparently, Araki did have a discussion with the Hokuto artist Tetsuo Hara, but I can't find anything else. Having read both manga, there's a lot of similarities between the two of them with numerous proof found within Araki's own series. It's no secret that Araki would sometimes borrow events from other anime and manga, such as Diego Brando's tragic youth with his mom is the same origin story found in Dororo, which is also in his top 10 list. There's numerous other things in JoJo that resemble other works of fiction, with some being removed from the anime adaptation, such as the pose featured on Pearl Jam's 10 album cover. So it isn't a stretch of the imagination that one of Araki's 80s influences could have been Hokuto no Ken, especially with proof like this. There's been at least 5 different panels that are direct imitations from the Fist of the North Star manga. The release dates were taken from the JoJo Wiki and Comic Vine Shonen Jump listings. However, that's not the only items worth discussing. There's many things they have in common in which Fist of the North Star did first, and the easiest comparison are the rush attacks.
Hokuto Shinken has no equal.
Prior to the signature face-offs of stand users, the very first rush attacks were performed by Jonathan Joestar via the Underwater Turquoise Overdrive, Overdrive Barrage, and the Sunlight Yellow Overdrive. Meanwhile, Kenshiro debuts his Hokuto Hyakuretsuken in Chapter 1, and this attack would play frequently in both manga and anime. Kenshiro's shirt rips apart as he powers up and he'd shout "Ata" or "Wata" like Bruce Lee. Another comparison to Bruce Lee is this scene from Enter the Dragon, where Bruce would lick the blood from his wounds. Kenshiro performed the same habit about a total of 3 times, which is also present in JoJo during Iggy's fight with Pet Shop.
Who does this guy think he is, Bruce Lee?
So Kenshiro undeniably predates JoJo's rush attacks, but if you want more proof, Kenshiro is not the only character that does this. In fact, almost everyone in Hokuto no Ken has a rush attack and their own battle cry. Fist of the North Star predates the Ora, Muda, Doras, Ides, Volas, etc. And if you want even more proof, Kenshiro performs the 100 Fist Rush during the 2 pilot chapters, which were published in Fresh Jump in 1982. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Other identical traits are the usage of masculinity, destiny, disposable villains, martial arts, and even the art style.
当時映画とかやっぱり好きなんで、シルベスター・スタローンとかアーノルド・シュワルツェネガーとかっていうのがこうちょっと流行ってたんですね。で、それって肉体的なキャラクターなんですよ。で、その肉体がもうムキムキで。
When asked about JoJo's usage of masculinity, Araki would cite the action stars of the 1980s, aka the Age of Muscles. This is true for Tetsuo Hara as well, whose characters' facial features are often modeled after actors, with Bruce Lee being the most prominent example. And to play devil's advocate, Hara also borrowed pre-existing art and photography. During the course of the series' 5-year run, Kenshiro starts resembling Sylvester Stallone with very unsubtle imagery to Cobra, a lot of Rocky, and a direct copy of Over the Top's poster. Tetsuo Hara also mimicked Frank Frazetta from time to time, and if you look very carefully in the background, you'll see Star Wars!
Star Wars! Yeah! Star Wars!
I just thought I'd be fair with the inspirations of these mangaka. Sylvester Stallone impacted both leads, Kenshiro and Joseph. According to Volume 1 of Battle Tendency, Joseph is a mix of Stallone and BT. Araki doesn't say this, but I'm willing to bet Joseph wearing Caesar's bandana happened because of Rambo First Blood Part 2. Hey, I've seen this before! JoJo has a lot of material that emulates Fists of the North Star. The easiest comparisons can be made between the Sapellis with the Six Sacred Fists of the South Star, or the Joestars with Kenshiro. Surprisingly, the main characters all have star-shaped birthmarks. In Kenshiro's case, the Hokuto clan have the Big Dipper on their heads, but the Joestar birthmark seems to be based on tattoos carried by the 5 chariots of the South Star. When Tom Petty foretells Sapelli's tragic fate to save Jonathan, that is essentially Shu's story. When Kenshiro was younger, he failed the 10-warrior Nanto challenge, which will end with his death. Shu opposed this as he saw a great destiny coming from within Kenshiro. To allow Ken to be spared, Shu cuts his own eyes to prove his resolve. Many years later, Shu is enslaved and tortured, but his sacrifice unites the 3 Hokuto brothers to face the Holy Emperor Souther. Shu is then impaled and crushed beneath Souther's mausoleum. This leads to one of the most impactful scenes of the series, with Kenshiro kneeling in tears. This looks very similar, doesn't it? The Sapelli family are martyr characters who inspire the Joestars to uphold justice and extinguish evil. Shu is similar to Will and Caesar, but the same can be said for Rei. If this series was JoJo, Rei would be Kenshiro's Jobro. While he has a role similar to Caesar, Rei also shares characteristics with Jean-Pierre Polnareff and Bruno Bucciarati. Both Polnareff and Rei debuted as enemy-turned-ally who are searching for the man who harmed their sister. In Rei's case, his sister Airi was going to be married until the villain Jaggy killed his parents and brother-in-law. For a time, Jaggy kept Airi as a personal slave until he sold her for a month's worth of food. We later learned that Airi was likely a sex slave, as she damaged her own eyes to escape from the horror. Rei traveled across the post-apocalyptic wastelands, which brought him to his new friends Kenshiro and Mamiya. With the help of Mamiya and Ken, Rei was able to reunite with his sister and heal her damaged eyes. Unlike Polnareff, Rei does not canonically kill his sister's attacker. Even so, from this point onward, Rei becomes Kenshiro's greatest friend and rediscovers his humanity as he begins to fall for Mamiya. Rei's next major event of his story occurred at the sudden arrival of a big-time villain. In his battle against Ken-O, Rei fatally loses this bout, but manages to save Kenshiro's life. Rei was prepared to die at the hands of Ken-O, for he was willing to repay Kenshiro for his compassion. All of this predates Caesar's fight with Wamu, who managed to grab the antidote and acted on his own sense of justice. But Rei's story is not over, for his comparison to Bucciarati occurs in his final hours. Rei was stricken with anguish and fear as Ken-O's technique gave him 3 days to live. In less than 72 hours, Rei succumbs to agony, terror, pain, and shame. He doesn't want Mamiya to see him dying. But, through another generous act, Rei's life was briefly extended, allowing him to save his love Mamiya from the perverse hands of Yuda. This predates Giorno reviving Bucciarati, who lives on borrowed time and is gradually weakening till his final moment. Rei performed the same bold actions many years prior. This type of manly sacrifices is what makes the emotional core of the Hokuto and JoJo series. Without this North Star and South Star determination, none of these scenes would bear the same impact and make them noteworthy. Another emotional moment is when Kenshiro grants a merciful, painless death to Souther, the man who killed Shu. This is recreated in JoJo when Joseph gives blood to the dying Wamu, despite killing Caesar. This is repeated with Jolene giving water to Foo Fighters who attempted to kill her. These types of interactions is what makes Fist of the North Star a grand manga that it had to inspire JoJo.
お前たちに今日を生きる資格はない。
Both Jonathan and Jotaro are half a Kenshiro. This will be expanded in the art department, but here's what I can provide to you right now. Visually, the original 3 Joestars bear a likeness to Kenshiro, Joseph being the least due to his personality. But there is one panel where he matches Kenshiro's face. Jonathan resembles Kenshiro the most, more so in the anime adaptation due to a wardrobe change. In the manga, Jonathan wears these coiled rings where his sleeves should be, but in the anime, Jonathan is given shoulder pads which lines up with Kenshiro's attire. In the internal similarities, Jonathan bears the compassionate heart of Kenshiro. Both are also capable of seeing through a man's heart and intentions, allowing them to spare some opponents such as Shu and Speedwagon. They even feel remorse for certain enemies' deaths, or bond with tragic characters such as Bruford, and with Ken that would be characters like Raiga, Fuga, and Ryuga. Even their villains have some comparable traits. The first main villain is a blonde man with delusions of grandeur. They sometimes wear capes with feathers. Both Shin and Dio go after the hero's loved ones with varying degrees of damage. There's even a scene where both heroes meet their respective villains by entering a castle, going up some stairs, and both utter the same phrase, "I've returned from hell," but one of them said it first. Ken and Jonathan's brothers also murder their father figure. Actually, Dio and Raul are both adopted. Raul vowed to conquer the heavens. Meanwhile, Dio wanted to obtain heaven. Admittedly, this is only something that occurred way later in Part 6 and wasn't his initial goal. The death of Ryuken and George Joestar makes both Jonathan and Kenshiro feel anger and grief, obviously. On a related note, Shu and Kenshiro also have a similar power-up moment. When Shu and Zeppeli are at death's door, both Jonathan and Kenshiro recover from their wounds and get really buff. Coincidentally, the 2006 movie version depicts Kenshiro with a yellow aura, similar to Hamon. I'm aware that Jotaro is influenced by characters played by Clint Eastwood, and a little bit of Columbo. But if Araki were to say Jotaro was not inspired by Kenshiro, that would be a lie. I know someone could bring up that Jotaro's pants is a reference to Dirty Harry.
What are you gonna do with those?
I'm gonna cut your pants off.
No, we'll pull them off.
Hey, hold on. What are you gonna do?
Cut your pants, of course.
Like hell you are. You ruin them. I'll take them off.
But when compared to Kenshiro, Jotaro has more DNA from Ken than Clint. There's a lot of fundamentals that Jotaro straight up took from Kenshiro and not totally making it his own, at least not in Part 3. In contrast to Jonathan's valorous noble nature, Jotaro is infused with Ken's rage, intimidation, his serious attitude, and stoic demeanor. These characters' roles are very interchangeable, especially during their iconic beatdowns, which segues to... A recurring activity in both series is the usage of disposable villains. What usually happens during a minor fight is the main character's theme song starts playing, and you know they're gonna win. This happens throughout the JoJo's sequels, but I'm gonna stick with Part 3 for this comparison. One of my dislikes of Stardust Crusaders is the abundance of throwaway henchmen. After seeing the charismatic Pillarmen, I'd wish JoJo continued that route. Instead, we have a bunch of Fist of the North Star thugs. Well, I think the proper terminology is bandit. Some of them are eccentric looking or border on fabulous. It wouldn't surprise me if some of these wacky looking villains rubbed off on Araki's own creations. In North Star, there's numerous bandits running amok, killing people for fun, and stealing their resources. But when they come across Kenshiro, they're already dead. And cue the victory theme, followed by a comedic beatdown via a rush attack. Ever since Stardust Crusaders, the other JoJo parts would follow suit with these laughable yet satisfying beatings, with the enemy completely breaking down and begging for mercy. And this all started with Kenshiro. So Jotaro is unique to Kenshiro for having a stand. Or is he really? What if I told you that Fist of the North Star has something comparable to a stand? In Fist of the North Star 2, the Hokuto clan apparently have access to a unique form of fighting energy called the Aura of the God of Battles. What does that mean exactly? I don't know. Well, episode 138 provides some clarification in its title, Kaio's declaration of victory. The Phantom of the North Star attacks. This unknown spirit appears behind a Hokuto Soke member. This entity is also capable of expressing rage and sorrow. However, it's a power-up that's not very well explained, because I don't know what it does, and I thought King Crimson was difficult to explain. It acts as a temporary invincibility, which allowed an unconscious Kenshiro to redirect Majin Kaio's attacks. This aura somehow weakened Kaio, but just long enough for Ken and Sachi to escape. Kenshiro's other brother, Hyo, also unleashed the aura of the God of Battles, but all it did was yell in grief, and these are the only 2 times it appears. But I'm not done yet, for there are 2 more stand-like apparitions. Episode 148 features an anime-exclusive attack in which Kenshiro punches Kaio with a massive fist, followed by the aura in the shape of his brother Raoul hovering beside him. Furthermore, Kenshiro refers to that punch as Raoul's technique. This is the only time it ever happens. The last North Star stand involves an unnamed female statue that's either sentient or haunted. While I believe it should be called a bodhisattva, the dialogue in Ken's Rage 2 referred to it as a caryatid. Meanwhile, the anime simply refers to her as the female statue. This statue is likely modeled after Oka, the mother and aunt of the first heirs to Hokuto Shinken. Oka's statue acts like the aura of the God of Battles, as it's some sort of power-up. Despite missing a leg, Oka's statue allowed Sachi to stand up and continue fighting for a limited time. Oka's statue was also able to harm Kaio by some type of holy ringing, and it holds a secret counter and the history to Hokuto Shinken and whatever. Kaio is also capable of making a fighting stance that mimics Oka's statue. Coincidentally or intentionally, the Joestars also has a family deity, being the goddess of love represented in a statue. This is the statue that Dio gets impaled on when the house is on fire. It's pretty easy to forget this detail from Phantom Blood. And that's all I was able to speculate. But the one true fact remains that all of this predates JoJo stands. Meanwhile, the 2000s prequel series, Fist of the Blue Sky, also briefly features stand-like auras. Given its date of publication, this may be a case where JoJo was the one who did the influencing, instead of the other way around. In Hokuto no Ken lore, the Big Dipper serves as a symbol for the strongest martial arts in existence, being Hokuto Shinken, aka the Divine Fist of the North Star. By pressing different pressure points in multiple sequences, you can control a person's body. This is typically used to make a person explode, but you can manipulate them to either commit harakiri or force them to move against their will, such as snapping their own bones. There's multiple uses and combinations that can force someone to poetically die with irony or karma, or abuse the art for your self-gain. And Hamon is kinda like that. Remember when Jonathan forces a headless zombie to hang on to a piston? That's something you could do with Hokuto Shinken. Both martial arts are capable of healing injuries as well as powering up the body, thus making yourself clouded with fighting ki or just make yourself bigger. The usage of striking with a single finger is also a notable trait of Hokuto Shinken. Kenshiro tends to point at his opponent, which makes one of his iconic poses. This is seen a few times within JoJo, and of course, both arts utilize rapid-fire punching. Araki and Hara tend to use close-ups of their characters' hands, making stance gestures. This sometimes creates the illusion of having multiple hands and arms while a character prepares their attack. Despite not using Hamon, Jolene is seen doing this during her fight against Westwood. There's a few other pieces of JoJo artwork that does this too. And that's where the common ground stops. Hamon has magnetic properties, it can travel through certain objects, and uses sunlight to fight vampires and zombies. Hokuto Shinken cannot do any of that. Well, except the part that both fighting styles lead to explosive results. I can't believe I forgot about this. Yoshikage Hira can also make people explode by touching them. There's no pressure points involved, but I thought it was worth comparing. Both arts are secretive and mystical, setting up the stage for the series' ominous uses of premonitions, fate, and destiny. In JoJo, I mentioned Tom Petty being able to see Zeppeli's future. Well, North Star has something bleaker. The Big Dipper normally shines with 7 stars in the sky, but if you see the 8th red star named Alcor, that means you're going to die within a year. Prior to JoJo, Araki was experimenting with his art while searching for his identity, something he wouldn't find till the 1990s and then again in the 2000s. In his manga, Magical Boy BT in Bao, Araki is trying to see what sticks. To address another mangaka going through a similar thing is Yusue Matsui, who can draw humans but he excels in surreal and abstract imagery. In these pre-JoJo manga, Araki looks a septimi because his drawings invoke a shonen that's westernized and cartoony, which is totally not his style. But then, a light appears in Gorgeous Irene where he starts going in that feminine route, which will eventually become the flamboyant traits of JoJo. Araki also started adding defined muscles to his characters. There were some muscular characters in Bao, but you can tell that Araki placed more focus on human anatomy during his run with Gorgeous Irene, a manga that only lasted 2 chapters in 1985. Fast forward to 1987 with Phantom Blood, and Araki's art style looks totally different from his previous works. Prior to 1985, Fist of the North Star was already being published. I know Araki got visual inspiration from that. I introduced you to another mangaka, being Miyashita Akira, whose art style also went through a change once Fist of the North Star appeared. Miyashita was very crass with his illustrations and writing style, as the goal of Ultimate Path Private High was to make a school for Yakuza in training. Many of his characters had very large legs with a small upper body. Coincidentally, that's how Araki started drawing manly characters in Phantom Blood. White at the bottom and middle, but small at the top. And how do I know that Hokuto no Ken directly influenced their art? Well, that's because all of the leading men look like Kenshiro, and the series inspired many copycats. That's what made me want to watch JoJo in the first place. Back in my day, this obscure OVA is the only thing that existed. I was recommended JoJo by other manly anime fans because that guy looks like Kenshiro. He punches really fast too. And that guy also looks like Kenshiro. So does that one! And that one too! And that guy has 5 bullets stuck in his chest. That's totally different than having 7 scars. Tetsuo Hara created the perfect template for drawing manly characters. When you see Keisuke Itagaki or George Morikawa, you can recognize certain tics and body types that's different from Hara, which has this neutral physique. The legs are a little elongated, but their builds are just the right size. It's not too exaggerated, but it's also realistic enough that it doesn't look like an anime. It could easily be mistaken for an American comic. Unlike other mangaka who developed their own facial features, Miyashita and Araki were copying Hara's art style, with mixed success. They do have unique details who eventually evolve into their own format. Prior to that, this is what they had in common. It's a combination of thick eyebrows, shading around the realistic nose and on the lips, the narrow eyes, and what I like to call the Hara jawline. It varies per panel, but there's usually a very straight line that makes up the side of the face. Both Araki and Miyashita gradually start drawing this way, and succeed in giving majestic faces to their manly characters. Getting back to the Jotaro and Kenshiro comparison, there's this panel. I could not unsee Jotaro being influenced by Kenshiro. And to bind them together is the animator Junichi Hayama, who's worked on both series, and this image is forever cemented in my brain. Capless Jotaro is a dead ringer for Ken. Meanwhile, there's the Phantom Blood movie, which also had Junichi Hayama, and he made Jonathan have a greater resemblance to Kenshiro. The same can be said with the Sakigake Otokojuku Pachinkos, which seem to have Junichi's involvement, or at least bear a similar art style. And another similarity occurred with an NFT. Yep, a non-fungible token. On October 2021, Masahiko Komino, the lead character designer of Stardust Crusaders, drew a few seconds of Kenshiro using the 100 Fist Rush. This was done as part of the Fist of the North Star manga fragments, which apparently are animated shorts based on the manga, but I haven't found anything else hitting the web. I think that's everything. After experiencing Fist of the North Star and JoJo back in the early 2010s, I was convinced that Araki was very influenced by the works of Buronson and Tetsuo Hara. JoJo is super popular now, but none of that would have happened if it weren't for Fist of the North Star. And its manga is finally being released in English after 2 failed attempts in previous decades. Hopefully the 2020s will be a good sign for this manly series. Fist of the North Star doesn't have to be casual mainstream. I just want Hokuto to be recognized enough that it's not mistaken for JoJo. I've been hearing that for nearly 10 years. I also don't want people to think JoJo was the first manly thing ever, when it never was, and his masculinity is practically gone by modern standards. Fist of the North Star will be turning 40 years old in the year 2023. Maybe a reboot will finally happen by then. I want to thank everyone who stayed with me this long, a thank you to my patrons for supporting the channel, and a thank you for watching my channel, The Anime Hero. My name is Alex, and I'll see you next time.